Okay, so the first thing we're going to review to get ready for STAR is all things linear. There are 3 linear equation forms that you need to know. Slope-intercept form is the most common form. It's the form that most equations are going to be written in. And you need to know that the m is the slope. What is slope also called? Rate of change. And the b is the y-intercept. What else can it be referred to, especially in word problems? Yes, but that's not what I'm looking for. But yes. It's actually the starting point. Or like if it's a word problem, like a one-time fee. I'll go over what that means. Now, I did hear somebody say independent and dependent. The y is the dependent because it depends on the x for whatever you're going to get for y. So x is independent and y is dependent. Okay, so if you think of like a word problem, so y'all listen because I'm only going to say it, we're not going to write it. But like, let's say that I get paid to babysit and I get $10 per hour, but they're going to pay me $20 just to show up for gas, like my gas fee. So how would you write an equation like that?
10x plus 20.
So that plus 20 is a one-time fee. They're only going to pay me one time for gas. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yes? And my rate per hour is this right here, which is the $10 per hour. Okay? Another example would be if I'm holding a balloon that has helium in it. And let's say I'm standing up and I'm holding it 6 feet in the air. And I let it go and it floats up 10 feet per second. How would you write that?
Y equals 10x plus 6.
10x plus 6. What was that 6? The starting point. That's where I started with the balloon. So does everybody understand starting point and rate? Okay, let's talk about how you find slope and y-intercept. So right here, how can you find slope? There's 3 ways I have taught you. Rise over run. Slope formula, which is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And that's on your star chart. And then what's the last way that I've taught you? Stat. Stat will find slope and y-intercept. But stat will only work if you have 2 coordinates. Make sense? So stat will only work if you have 2 coordinates. This formula will only work if you have 2 coordinates. Rise over run will only work if you got to have a graph with 2 coordinates, right? So all 3 of these only work if you have 2 coordinates. Okay? Now to find the y-intercept, it's where it crosses the y-axis. So if you're looking at a graph, it's just clearly where it crosses the y-axis. It also, you can ask yourself, what is y when x is 0? Because on the y-axis, the value of x will always be 0. And the last way that you can find the y-intercept, but you have to know the slope and 1 point. So if you know the m and 1, can I write point? Are y'all good with that, or do I need to write coordinate?
Point.
Okay, 1 point you can plug in and solve. If you have m, which is slope, and 1 point, you can plug in and solve. So if y'all look, if I have 1 point, if I have an x, a y, and an m equals, then I can plug in this formula, I can plug in the y, the m, the x, and I can solve for the b. Yes? We have to do that when we don't have 2 points. Because if I have 2 points, stat will always give me slope and y-intercept. Yes? But if they give me slope and 1 point, then this is the way. Now, another way you could do it if you don't want to do it this way. You could make a graph, yes? You could plot that point, and you could use the slope to rise up 1 and run the other way, and there's your 2 points, and you could go use stat. So there's lots of different ways to do this stuff. Do you have any questions about slope-intercept? Okay, the next one you need to know is point slope. This is not near as common to use, but you can use it, and they could ask a question on it on the EOC. But basically, this right here is still the what? That is still the slope. And this and this is a coordinate. But it's the opposite, because see the minus sign right here? So if it's minus 5, the y would be 5. If it's minus 2, the x would be 2. If it's plus 5, then it's going to be negative. Yeah, it's the opposite because the formula puts that minus sign in. Okay? Anytime we do this, the only reason that I like to write an equation in this form is if they give me a slope and 1 point. So that's another way you could find this, and then you could write it like this, and you could rearrange it to y equals mx plus b. It's not my favorite way, but it works. Okay, so you want to do a little example? If I told you the slope is 5, and it passes through 2, 3, and I said write an equation. If I don't specify that it has to be an mx plus b form, then I would 100% use this because all I have to do is plug stuff in. So I would say y minus the y value. Well, what is the y value? 3. Equals, what would come next?
5.
The slope, 5, open parentheses, x minus the x value, 2. And that is a correct equation in point slope form. If I wanted to from here, I could rearrange it to mx plus b form. I could do distributive property here, yes, and then I could move this minus 3 to the other side by plussing 3, and I would now have it in slope-intercept form, and I would be able to identify the y-intercept. I have the slope right here, which is 5, yes? Okay, any questions? Okay, standard form is the least used form, but the reason that we use standard form is to write equations in real life where they're comparing two things that are similar. So over here, this is when you have a slope, a rate and a one-time fee. So something like this would be like on the x-axis and y-axis, x would be like hours and the y would be like the total cost. Anytime y is your total, you're going to use mx plus b form. But over here, you don't have a y as a total. It's kind of like orange juice and apple juice. Do you see how the y is not a total? That's when you use standard form. And we use standard form a lot of time to solve when there's two equations and we have to put them together. Okay, correct standard form, remember that this number can never be a negative or a fraction or decimal. But if that's the answer choices they give you, then it can absolutely be the answer. So For example, if they ask which equation represents this situation, and all of the equations have decimals, then it represents the situation. It's not in proper form, but it can be used. Yes? Can you rearrange these to y equals mx plus b once you have it? Yes. So those are the three forms that you have to know. Okay? Go down to the bottom. Now let's talk about parallel lines and perpendicular lines. Parallel lines mean that they will never touch. So there's a lot of things you need to know about this. First of all, if I said, what's the solution? You would say, there is no solution because they will never touch. But sometimes they're going to give you a problem where they're asking for you to come up with an equation knowing that it's parallel. So let's talk about that. Parallel lines have the same slope. They have the exact same slope. But are they going to have the same y-intercept? No. So knowing that information, let's read this question. It says, what is the equation? And it wants it in standard form. Okay, but we're not even going to worry about that right now. Of the line that passes through this point and is parallel to this equation. Well, if it's parallel, I know that the slopes are the same. So what would I do to find the slope of this? I would rearrange it. Okay, so that's the first thing I would do is I'd say 3y is equal to negative 8x plus 15. Now what would I do? Divide by 3. And so I have y equals negative 8/3 x plus 5. I have solved nothing. All I did was rearrange this equation so that I could identify the slope. Okay? I know that parallel lines have the same slope. They're wanting me to come up with an equation of a line that's parallel to this. So if it's parallel, then what's my slope going to be? Negative 8/3. But will my y-intercept be the same? No, because that means it would be the exact same line. And it's not the same line. It's a parallel line. But it passes through 6, negative 1. So I need to come up with an equation. Well, I know that I can write an equation in y equals mx plus b form. I know the slope, yes? What else do I know? I don't know the y-intercept. I know that y-intercept, but I know this one's going to be different. I have a point. I have an x that it passes through, and I have a y that it passes through. So I could go write it in point slope, yes, and then rearrange. Or I could plug this in for x and this in for y and solve for b. Yeah? So there's lots of different ways you could do this. I like to solve for b. So I'm going to say y is negative 1. M is negative 8/3. X is 6. And I'm going to solve for b. Okay, so I say, well, what is negative 8/3 times 6? It's negative 16. Yes? So negative 1 equals negative 16 plus b. Now what do I do? Plus 16. So I have 15 equals b. So now can I write the equation? I know the slope and I know the y-intercept. So I have y equals negative 8/3 x plus 15. So what this tells you is that this equation is parallel to this one. Are we okay? All right, now let's talk about perpendicular lines. Perpendicular lines have opposite reciprocal slopes. Y'all remember what that means? Okay, opposite means instead of positive, it will be? Okay, and reciprocal means you flip the fraction. Or if it's like a whole number like 2, you flip it, it becomes 1/2. Okay, so look at the example they gave you in this picture. I'm going to blow it up so y'all can see it. This line has an equation of y equals negative 4/3 x plus 1. And this one is 3/4 x minus 2. How do I know that they're perpendicular? The slopes are opposite and then reciprocals. They're flipped over. Knowing this, you can solve for an equation that's perpendicular if they give you an equation and a point. So let's look. It says, what is the equation of a line that passes through 2, 3? It's perpendicular to this. Well, this slope is what? Give it to me in fraction form. Negative 1/2. So a perpendicular slope will be opposite of this. So instead of negative, it's going to be positive, and you flip the fraction, and it's now. So my slope of my perpendicular line will be 2. And now I can either use point slope form and make an equation out of that, or I can do y equals mx plus b and plug in the m, the x, and the y and solve. You choose which way you want to do it. I'm going to plug in 3 equals 2 times 2 plus b. Are y'all good with what I'm doing? Yes. Okay, so 3 equals 4 plus b. How do I get rid of 4? So negative 1 is the y-intercept. What's my slope of my new line? 2. So my equation would be y equals 2x minus 1. And what that's telling me is this equation is perpendicular to this equation. And it passes through 2, 3. Easy? Okay, flip to the back. Okay, a few more things that we'll learn about linear situations is you can look at inequalities that are linear. You will have to write equations of inequalities that are linear. So I just kind of wanted to remind you of what this was. You'll have to come up with the equation, so it's always going to be in y, not y equals form, but y like is less than or greater than, right? So this is y. Since this line is dashed, it won't have an or equal to, right? Since it's shaded left, it's less than. Now, how could I write an equation for this? I could do stat, or I could go rise over run and figure out the slope and the y-intercept. I don't care how you do it. If you want to use stat, okay, so if you want to use stat, you need 2 points, any 2 points. So I could say there's a point at 0, 7, and there's a point at 4, 0. I could go to stat, and it will tell me the slope and y-intercept. Or I know the y-intercept is 7, yeah? So that's plus 7. And I could do rise over run, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 over 1, 2, 3, 4. And is it negative or positive? Is this going down or up? From left to right.
Wait, what's going down?
The line.
Oh, down.
From left to right, it's going down. That means it's negative. So because this is up, that's positive. That's left, that's negative. So negative 7/4 x plus 7. Okay, if you use stat, it would give you 7/4 as a decimal. Are we okay? Okay. So you will have to do this, and it might even ask for this in standard form. So let's practice that real quick. How would I make this into standard form? This has got to be moved to that side. So I'd have positive 7/4 x plus y is less than 7. And if I didn't want this as a fraction, I multiply by the denominator, the whole equation. So I go like this. Everything's going to be multiplied by 4. 4 times 7/4 is 7. It basically just cancels it out. So I'd have 7x plus 4y is less than 28. So it could ask for it in standard form. It could ask for it in slope-intercept form. You've got to be prepared to do it both ways. Yes? All right. Solving equations and solving systems of equations. Anytime it asks you to solve an equation, you can simply use your y equals button. And then hit second, trace, option 5, enter 3 times. Yes? If it doesn't give you the answer, then you have to fix your windows because it can't see the intersection. Are y'all okay? You could go solve that by hand, do distributive property, get all the y's to the left, or you could just use your buttons. So let's make sure we're good. Here we go. 4 open parentheses, x minus 3 close parentheses, plus 19. Then my next one is 8 open parentheses, 2x plus 3 close parentheses plus 7. Now what would I hit? Second trace, option 5, wait for it to graph. Can I see the intersection? So it will give it to me. If I can't, I have to fix my windows. Enter, enter, enter. My answer is -2. Now, if it asks you to solve a system of equations, then you have 2 options. Your options are, you can use the elimination method, but you have to line it up in standard form, or you can do substitution, which I barely taught y'all, or you can solve for y, rearrange the y equals, and do what we just did.
Let's do the standard.
Y'all, okay, I'll show y'all both ways, okay? All right, so if I want to do it the way that we just did it, I have to get it in y equals form. Okay, so I'm going to come down here to show my work. So I have 6y equals, how would I move this x? Minus, so -x minus 59, yes? How would I get rid of this? 6. Divide everything by 6. So I have y equals -x over 6 minus 59, 6. Will my calculator read something like that? Absolutely. Is it in y equals form? Okay. But I also have to do this one, yes? All right, so I'm just going to move this to the left first. So I have -2y plus 9 equals x. So how would I get y by itself? First, I got to get rid of what? The 9. So I have -2y equals x minus 9. How would I get rid of the -2? Divide by -2. So I have y equals -x over 2, or x over -2, doesn't matter where the negative is. No? Plus 9 halves, or 4.5, whatever you want to put. Are they both in y equals form? So now my calculator will solve it for me. So I go to y equals. I have negative alpha y equals x on top, 6 on bottom, tab out, minus alpha y equals 59 over 6. Now this one, negative alpha y equals x on top, 2 on bottom, tab out, plus, I'm going to put 4.5 because I don't feel like using alpha y. Second trace, option 5. Can I see the intersection? So if I hit enter 3 times, what happened? Because it cannot see the answer. I have to go use my windows And I've got to, well, let's go to negative 200, positive 200. So now if I do second trace option 5, hopefully I'll be able to see an intersection. If I still can't see it, then I need to make my windows even bigger. Do I see the intersection? Enter, enter, enter. There's your answer.
Where's it at? What's your window?
I said I'm at negative 200, positive 200. But sometimes, guys, if your answer is 300, it's still not going to see it. So the bigger the answer is, the more you've got to zoom out in your window. Okay? You can literally zoom out to thousands or millions if you need to, but you shouldn't need to, but you can. So my answer, the x value is 43. Most of the time they're asking for the x value, but sometimes they ask for the y. The y value is negative 17. So it will be one of those answers, or both. All right, y'all want me to teach y'all substitution? That's the way we learned it.
I said elimination.
Elimination, that's what I meant to say. Elimination.
Wait, substitution's different.
Substitution, yeah, substitution. All right, elimination, you need to line them up in standard form. This one's already in standard form. So I have 6. Well, I don't like that the y's on the left. That's going to bother me. All right, so I have x plus 6y equals negative 59. Here I have x. How would I get this 2y over here? Plus 2y equals 9. To do elimination, you have to make one of these opposite of each other.
The top one by negative.
Okay, so he said multiply the top one by negative. So if I multiply this whole equation by negative, this is going to be negative, this is going to turn negative, and this is going to turn positive. You pick which way you want to do it. I'm showing y'all both ways that I taught you. Okay? Okay, so what I would do now is eliminate and combine. Negative x with x cancels out. Yes? Negative 6 plus 2 is negative 4y equals. And 59 plus 9, 68. Divide by negative 4, and 68 divided by negative 4 is what? Is that what we got right here?
Yes.
And if I want the x value, then I plug this back in to one of those equations. I would choose this one because it's already telling me x equals. So x equals negative 2 times whatever you got for y plus 9. Negative 2 times negative 17 plus 9 is 43. You decide which way you like to do it. It does not matter to me. Whatever's the easiest for you. A lot of people like this way because we've gotten very good at rearranging equations to y equals. Okay, so if this way is better for you, it will work every single time. But your windows have to be set to see the intersection. Does that make sense? Okay. The last thing I'm just going to mention, we're not going to do an example, is how to make predictions in scatter plots. Okay? So if you have a scatter plot, y'all can draw this if you want, you don't have to. If you have a scatter plot like this, that is a linear trend, which means you can write an equation for a trend line. So the trend line would look something like this, yes? And that equation can be written in y equals mx plus b form. So you would have to make a table and list all of those coordinates and then stick it in stat and make an equation. You can then use the equation to make a prediction. They could say, what would it be if it was 10 hours? And you would, I'm going to make up an equation, okay? Y equals 3x plus 5. If I said, what would it be for 10 hours? Well, plug 10 in for x and solve, and then there would be your answer. If it said, How many hours would it be if the total was 50? Well, where would you plug total in for? The y, and then you would solve for x. Everybody good? All right, so now you're going to practice some star questions over linear situations.